here we are with the Healing Mastery Summit, Dr. Steve Young. And welcome, Dr. Steve Young. Always a pleasure to have you.
Yes.
So thank you for being here. And if you don't know who Dr. Steve Young is, he's the co-founder of Ammortal. And you have a moonshot. And for those that don't know what a moonshot is, that's like the biggest dream, the biggest idea, biggest goal. That's to help 1 billion people love their way to building their greatest legacy by providing the tools and systems to fuel their journey with the utmost health and vitality. Right? So, you're a foodie, right? Your goal is to eat the top 50 restaurants. I love that goal. It's awesome.
Yes.
In the world, and strive to be a mix between Elon Musk and the Dali Lama. And you also love to talk deeply about life, health, metacognition, parenting, and living to 150 years. So this will probably go into a lot of those things on this topic. But yeah, the main goal of this topic is like people listening here are probably confused. They're probably a little lost. They don't have clarity and direction as to how to live longer and get healthier. And so the root cause versus the symptom is a great place to start, which we talked about previously. And because when people have an issue, they'll go to the doctor and the doctor will like deal with the symptom, right? Rather than the root cause. And the root cause is really where they should be going towards. So can you just explain, like, in your terms, how you deal with that and how you help people to understand the difference between the two?
Sure. Yeah, I think before we get to that, I would like to tell the story because some people, I feel like we conceptually get when we say, hey, root cause versus symptoms. Of course, it makes sense to treat the root cause. But I feel like as health experts, we're in the system so much, we kind of know how it works and
Yes.
how really traditional medicine is not in any way addressing root causes.
Right.
However, sometimes I forget, like, some of the people we're talking to are not health experts, right? They're just like, everyday people who have their jobs and other professions that they actually don't fully comprehend what's really happening, right? So usually before I get to symptoms versus root cause, I'll tell the story. And the story is, imagine, your child is crying and just won't stop, and you want to obviously have him or her stop crying. And so you take the child to the doctor, and the doctor, the kid's crying the whole time in the waiting area, in the office, in front of the doctor. The doctor examines the child, maybe does some blood work, and comes back and says, I've got it. And they come back with a prescription, and you go, perfect, this is the solution. And the child's like crying in the car, crying on its way to the pharmacy. The pharmacist gets a piece of paper. He goes, oh, okay. Comes back, and they basically come back with a piece of duct tape.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Right. And so the duct tape goes over the mouth. It's like, that child's not crying anymore. But you're like, this can't be healthy, right? And so like, all right, the traditional doctor is not working. Let's take them to a holistic doctor, right? And so they take them to the holistic doctor. They take the duct tape off. The kid's still crying. And a holistic doctor was like, those traditional doctors, the glue in the duct tape is horrible for the skin. How dare they? That's just horrible. Those chemicals are awful for you. We've got the better solution. And so they get this natural, organic, non-GMO, earth-friendly, sustainably grown sponge, and they put it over the mouth. They go, see, this is much better. It's a healthier way to stop the crying.
Right.
Right. And so normally what you would, of course, would want to do is talk to the child, right? And ask questions like, hey, what were you doing before you started crying? Did you eat something before you started crying?
Right.
Did something happen to you before you started crying?
Exactly.
Right. So you want to dig deep into where were you? Like, what was the environment like before you started crying? Right. So you want to dig deeper into what was the environment like? What chemical things may have happened? Did the kid eat something?
Yep.
Did the kid fall? Like, was there a mechanical insult to the body or a mechanical thing that happened? I don't know. Did someone shout at the kid? Right. Something mental happened. And an energetic would be, what was the energetic? And from energetic, we can look at it as, I don't know, was a Wi-Fi router affecting their genes, or maybe some energy was sent to them that was not serving? That's energy, right? And so that's really looking at the root causes. And so, yeah, what we found is that once we master the practice of actually looking at a whole different reality of getting to root causes,
right,
we can actually end the symptoms permanently.
And so I deal with back pain. I specialize in back pain relief.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can deal with mechanical issues all day, but a lot of times that's not the root cause of the issue, right? And I don't know if I'm sure you've dealt with this, right? Because you're in the movement and body solutions, physical therapy. So how do you address something like that? Like, say someone has a physical pain and it's rooted in emotions, and you're there sitting there like trying to fix the arm, and right? So where do you go from there?
Yeah. And so, you know, we can actually use back pain as we'll call like a case study, and we'll walk through the different realities of the root cause. And so, and keep in mind that when I went through physical therapy school to get my master's and doctorate, we were under the impression that we were finding the root causes.
Right.
So in our world, the root cause would be a tight hamstring, a weak core, some type of musculoskeletal dysfunction.
Right.
And it's true that is some of the mechanical root causes, but it is not all the root causes.
Yeah.
Right? And so we'll pick back pain example. So typically from a mechanical perspective, we would see tight hip flexors, tight hamstrings, right? Maybe some tight hip rotators, maybe some core imbalances, maybe the nervous system isn't activating some of the core stabilizers well, right? So those are the mechanical stuff. From a mind perspective, yeah, so it could be a very common link from a mental, emotional perspective as it relates to back pain is this gap where you are now in life versus where you feel like you should be from a financial and responsibility perspective.
Right.
Right. So that gap is the most predominant root cause from a mental perspective for back pain, right? I should be there professionally, or I don't have enough money. It's basically this gap, this discrepancy between the material things I have in life where I expect to be. That's a very common root cause from a psychological perspective. And that's, again, just mental. And then we can look at
judgment.
Yes, yeah. So judgment of, you know, comparing, right? Comparing, whether it be comparing to others, it could be comparing to self, like I should have been here by this age.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that it's that gap, I call it. Environmental, right? Obviously the workstation, right? How are you sitting? Where's your computer positioned? Your environmental, do you typically sit leaning to one side versus the other side? Do you sit kind of slouch versus upright? Right, so your environment, looking at sort of, you know, in the professional world, they would call it ergonomics. But I just, you know, even open more, it would be environment. We can also look at, again, like energetics. And so with energetics, and just so you know, every one of these realities blends in with each other, right? And so, for example, mechanical, if you're forward like this on the computer, that also changes your physiology, right? I mean, for men, we know it suppresses testosterone. There's studies showing that decreases focus and concentration, literally affects our brain chemicals the way we're positioned. So,
right?
Yeah. And so, right, I mean, it all overlaps, right? Yeah. And so from an energetic standpoint, again, some of the thoughts of that mental gap crosses into the energy aspect because there's emotions involved. And so those emotions then dictates the frequency of our vibrations, which dictates the epigenetics and the proteins that we express, right? And so, yeah, you can see how all of that is much deeper than simply tight hamstrings. And the one we didn't talk about is chemical, right? So inflammation. If your gut's inflamed, more than likely you're gonna have some type of back issue, right? Because your entire healing system and adaptation system is now disrupted.
Cool. So let's talk about frequency, because a lot of people, you know, who might be sick and they want healing, and you talk to them about, you know, energy or frequency, they're like, what is that? Because all they've known and all they've been told is that you feel bad, you go to the doctor, and that's it. So maybe speak about the actual science of this. Like you talked about the frequency and the energy, and how that affects the, you know, gene expressions. How did that affect everything overall? Like, where does that take them, and how can that either help them in one way or maybe take them down a bad path?
Got it. Yeah, so, you know, it's interesting. Human beings are capable of so much more than what we're being told by the masses, right? And so just in the last 6 months, I came across some articles on how our DNA literally has the ability to make light particles.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, we're literally light beings. And there's language of this. If you study shamanism, like 10,000-year-old healing practices, they have words like homo luminous, right? Instead of homo sapien, luminous is light. And they literally have entire practices and rites and rituals designed to get a human to be homo luminous, to be a light being, right?
Yep.
And so literally all the way back, I trace back to look at scientifically how long have we learned that we can actually generate light particles and data transmit out into the universe, right? Because when you generate a light particle and it shoots out away from you, it doesn't just go an inch or a mile, it keeps going.
Forever.
We've known this since 1984. This is
Yeah.
not even new information, right? So in 1984, they were already able to detect some of these photons that our DNA, our cells, are actually making and emitting from us, right? And so we're constantly broadcasting this energy away from us. And a light particle versus a wave, if you study very, 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 very small particle physics, it's about the same, right? Everything is actually in a wave, and actually everything is a particle. It's
Right.
a whole other
Some
topic.
just go this way and some go, right?
Yeah, the duality. Yeah, like we exist in this duality, you know, night and day, everything has opposites. So the opposite of a particle is a wave. And what's fascinating is if you look at very small quantum mechanics, the study of small particle physics, things can be a particle in a wave at the same time. It's a little mind-blowing, right?
Wow,
and so when we have these light particles shooting from us, I could also say we're emitting waves of energy away from us, which is a frequency, right? If anything is in a wave, it's a frequency. So we're literally like antennas broadcasting frequency into the universe constantly, right? Most people have a certain level of existence where they believe they're just observing reality, where science shows we're actually projecting and observing reality. Everything has its opposite that's happening in exactly the same time.
Right.
And so once you understand that high level framework, then of course we look at, well, what affects the frequency? And those are called emotions, right? So our every emotion is affecting our vibrations, and those vibrations we now know literally because our DNA is emitting the frequencies. Of course, our DNA is being affected by the frequencies, right? It's making frequency and affected by frequency, thus the duality, right? And so in biological terms, we use different language. We would say epigenetics,
Right.
Epigenetically being affected and all that stuff. So yeah, it's fascinating. We can use language from different sciences to describe the same thing, which essentially, if you sort of use layman's terms, like our thoughts and emotions are constantly affecting our entire being from a genetic level.
So like each thought basically emits a chemical in the body, or like an energy, and then that affects like everything on a cellular level, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And so to say chemical, now we're going to describe it from a biology chemical standpoint. Absolutely. Every thought and emotion is releasing, right? Dopamine, serotonin, I mean, all kinds of chemicals. And I'm sure tons of chemicals we haven't even discovered, right? They're constantly, in physiology, they're constantly describing and naming new chemicals.
Right.
Constantly being developed and described and measured. And so, yep, that's another reality to look at. And it's almost like that's like the higher level. If we drill down to smaller and smaller particles, at the end of the day, it's, you know, waves and small subatomic particles, basically. At a higher macro level, yep, it's the serotonin, the dopamine, the oxytocin, all that stuff. Yeah.
So could it be said that if someone's stuck in a dis-ease state, or kind of just like a life filled with snags and disappointments, that they're operating at a low or in emotions that aren't really helping them out?
Yeah. Yeah, I think
to get better, they have to elevate maybe the mindset, or how would they go about doing that?
Sure, that's a great frame. So I tend to look at things, just think our language, if the gap is really, to me, the gap is just like where we feel like we should be.
Yeah.
Right. If we think linear, if we're supposed to be here, right, and here, that gap is actually one of the biggest conceptual root causes of stuff that we don't like in our lives.
Yeah.
Right. And so mass media language will perpetuate this gap subconsciously, even if the teacher is trying to get people to close the gap.
Right.
And some of it has to be done in a way, right? Because you have to experience the duality in order to experience oneness.
Right.
So the language in the beginning will be, there's certain levels of emotion. There's, you'll hear common language like there's good and bad feelings.
Yeah.
In the beginning, as you're a white belt studying this, that language is actually very helpful, right? Because how we learn is in duality.
Yep.
And the reason I'm describing this is because I'm assuming the listeners, if we just use the martial arts, analogy, some listeners will be white belts and some listeners will be black belts.
Yeah.
And so as you're listening to this, discern for yourself, if you're a white belt, fully embody the words of duality of the levels and good and bad. If you're a black belt, then you want to use different words, right? Because it's a different level of practice, right? Just use duality there. And so for sure, from the white belt perspective, if I have to use white belt words, there is this, you see graphs like love and bliss is up here in terms of vibration, and like anger and hatred is down here. Right. That's a very dualistic, linear way of assessing emotions. And you hear things like, if you're stuck here, this is not serving, and you got to like work your way up to the higher vibrational frequencies, right? Definitely, that's an amazing white belt practice. In the beginning, you think that way and you embody that. And how you do that is, whatever level that you're quote unquote stuck at, essentially there's a lesson that universe, God, or whatever your reality is basically just trying to get you to learn. Right. If you think about it, once you learn that lesson, what that means is you will see things differently. You would have a different thought and emotion to the same life. Right. And therefore, boom.
Different perception.
Automatically, like your perception changes. That's just purely from a psychological perspective. We don't have to go spiritual and all that stuff.
Right.
It's that. Right. And so as a black belt, I'll present a different reality. As a black belt, you go, all of this is constantly happening at once in us. And everything has value.
Right.
There is no duality. There is no good and bad emotions. And everything is a lesson. And I'm actually teaching myself because I am the universe.
Right.
And I am God. And so there are two very different realities. Neither one is right or wrong. It depends on where you are in your experience and journey. Yeah. So I like to, sometimes give that distinction so the black belts resonate with it and white belts resonate. So it all makes sense.
Yeah. So we're a big broadcasting signal, right? Would you say we're a receiver too?
Yes.
And how does that work?
Yeah, because in that reality, again, I'll use white belt words, duality, where everything has to have opposites at exactly the same time. Right. So for sending, the opposite of sending would be receiving. Right. So in that level of existence, that has to be constantly happening. Right. In the black belt world, in oneness, there is no sending and receiving, and everything has already happened. Everything is. That makes sense. It's oneness, right? There's nothing to send and receive. All future, past, and present is now. So there's everything that's ever being sent or received or created or destroyed is now.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's a little bit different concept. Yeah, but just think about it. In that moment, you actually have this amazing sense of peace. But in that moment, it's hard to learn things.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, but you're not really learning. You kind of require the duality to learn. And so we, as human beings, we get to choose and dance between those two frames whenever we choose to.
And that's interesting because they could say like disease is not being in that nowness, right? Which is like anxiety is, thinking about the future, depression is about the past, etc. Have you ever heard of the Hopi tribe?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I was reading about them is that they didn't have any words for the future or the past.
Yeah. And
so they're exactly what you were talking about. And I always think about, imagine the life of the person that is now and can't think about anything else, and what their life would be like, and would they be susceptible to some of the stuff that we're dealing with nowadays? Pretty awesome. So, one thing I want to step into is a little bit about injury. Mm-hmm. Because that's something that you focus on, right? You're dealing with people with injuries. So we'll talk about dis-ease, which is, what would you label dis-ease as?
Yeah. To me, disease is any state. I mean, this is going to sound a little silly and simple, but any state that's not ease, right? And so it's literally as simple as that. Like anytime you can check in with yourself, in a state of ease,
Yeah.
also known as calm, peace, and all that stuff,
Right.
or am I in a state of dis-ease?
Yeah.
And the state that you're in, if you're, and you know, no one lives in either or all the time. But if you're majority of the time in a state of dis-ease, then your body will tell you, hey, Bob, you're in a state of disease. And how it communicates is symptoms.
Gotcha. Now, in terms of injury, so if someone is susceptible to injury, or they have a lot of injuries, or they're scared of injuries, and for example, I run a personal training facility, and injury is a part of life, and we tell people like exercising is a way to get healthy, and so there's always like a percentage and a chance that something's going to happen.
Yeah.
So how do they reduce the risk of injury when it comes to those type of things?
Great question. Oh, I feel like we could spend 5 hours on this. Let's do 5. So I'll start with the mechanical because that'll be the easiest.
Yeah.
So a movement, whenever you work out, right, has a skill component to it. Most people only look at the movement purely from a strength, endurance, flexibility perspective.
Right.
But if you think about it in the fitness world, if I were to say to any trainer, test and measure the skill level of the person, they would be like, well, what test is that? Right? It doesn't exist. And so any movements like juggling a ball, right? You're either juggling one ball or it could be 12, 13 balls. And so a lot of times from a mechanical perspective, the person may be doing a movement that's like juggling 5 balls, but they're only skilled at juggling 3 balls. And so they're dropping a few balls every time they do this. And what that shows up as, the joints are not being controlled properly. They're just sliding a millimeter or 2.
Yeah.
But as that perpetuates, that's going to cause some inflammation and some, stuff builds up, right? Most people don't get hurt in the gym by going, oh, it's more like, oh, my knee's starting to get a little sore, or my shoulder's starting to get a little sore. Yeah. It's not like a trauma injury.
Right. Those are very rare usually.
Those are very rare. The buildup is from weeks or months ago, that mismatch of 5 balls versus 3 balls, which is what they're really skilled at, right? So from a mechanical perspective, it's purely a mismatch of the movement skill versus the movement, because in the entire industry, there lacks this process of detecting that, right? And so I've thought about this for decades, which is why we basically came up with a process of testing that like 7 years ago, because there's such a huge problem in physical therapy. We were treating tons of people who were getting injured in the area from training because of this mismatch.
Right.
And so that's mechanical. I'm not sure if you want to go deep into the mind and the other aspects of it as well, but that's
we're talking about it. So because I think that's an important aspect of it. I think it's one of the most important things is like how connected, and that's what we teach when we train people, is like connecting the mind with the body. And it's a new thing for a lot of people. It's like they don't understand that they have the ability to really think about the area that they want to focus on and then connect with that spot.
Yes. Yeah. I love that you guys do that, because a lot of trainers frame an exercise simply as a way to get away from where you are now to get to that other. I believe that could be a side effect. And the main intention is, how do you deepen your communication with your body?
Yes.
Right? Because every time you move a resistance, obviously that requires concentration and focus on your body, ideally.
Right.
And so you would move that body and tune into every pressure, subtle sensation, tension, all that stuff. If you make that the primary focus, and have the side effect be the weight loss, to get in shape, to look better, feel better, and all that stuff, that intention alone does bypass a lot of injuries, right? And because if you think about what's happening is your relationship building versus focusing on the gap.
Right. That's what I was going to say, is basically what you're talking about is not being in the now. Is you're all of a sudden thinking about different things, and then all of a sudden, oh, I hurt my hip.
Yeah.
Instead of being present inside the body and focusing on the movement pattern, right?
Yes, like in that moment, absolutely. But even broader, if the entire intention is we're gonna lose X number of pounds, and that's running in the subconscious mind. They're not actually thinking about it in the moment, but that in itself is a gap subconsciously, and that's running all the time, right? Our subconscious is constantly processing. So no matter how present they are in the moment, if the focus is let's get you X weight pounds off or on, whatever they want to change in their body, if that is actually a focus, then that's still the gap that's being subconsciously practiced, right? And so while that can be defined, you can have a clear communication with the person where nope, the number one intention is you're going to be ultra in tune and more in tune into your body and yourself.
So this connects to the other thing that I was going to talk to you about, because we're talking about basically disease prevention, talking about injury prevention, and then I want to talk to you now about living to 150 years old, which is your goal, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about living a life to 150 years old that is you're mechanically working well, feeling well, and you're in ease ideally most of the time.
Yep.
So how do people I think most of the people what we're dealing with is they're living in a lot of fear, and fear that maybe they might get cancer. They might get some heart disease. They're going to have a heart attack. They're going to have this issue, whatever it might be, some neurological issue, especially now. So what do people need to do in order to increase the span of their life or to live a better life while they're here on this earth?
Yep. Great question. And so we can circle back to symptoms versus root cause, right? And so the symptoms would be like, I'm stiff, I'm achy, I have brain fog, I'm tired. Those are symptoms, right? And so the root causes, which is really what you're asking, what's the thing to focus on that unlocks all of that? Those are things in weight issues, right? That's a symptom. The root cause is what's my relationship with myself? What's my relationship with food?
Right.
Because if sweets are a way for you to not feel bored, or could be replaced with any other emotion, no matter how much you intermittent fast or count your calories or go on any diet, doesn't matter. At some point, that relationship is still in place. It will always manifest into multiple symptoms.
Yes.
Right? And so paying attention to your relationship with food, paying attention to, really just the stories that you have at the highest level, right? What is health for you? How do you value yourself? What are you currently doing to fill that gap, right? If you feel that gap that's there, for example, this is where I should be because then I will have love and respect from parents and society, and this is where I'm at. I'm going to fill that gap by doing lots of stuff. And once I accomplish those things, then I'll close that gap. Well, that person will constantly put themselves, health, lower on the priority because feeling love and connected trumps health any day.
Yes.
And so because they feel that gap in feeling loved and connected and respected and worthy, they will constantly overwork and do all this stuff. And they're the people that will say things, it'll show up in their language, such as, I just don't have time for blank, blank, blank.
Yep.
Right? And of course, then we'll logic them and say, you just got to set a higher priority. But it's not that simple because the story of how the path they're choosing to get and close that gap, that's got to be talked about, right? So that's another root cause of every
So basically what you're talking to me about is belief systems that they're living out through stories. And would you say is like the root cause?
It's one of the main mental root causes.
Yeah, okay.
For sure. I'll give you an example. I literally just had a patient that started. He has 4 jobs, serious jobs. We're talking like university professor, an accountant, a lawyer, and a pastor.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's not like clocking in at McDonald's or whatever. These are 4 serious professions all happening at the same time.
Lots of stress.
Yeah, and so he's been in pain for more than 14 years. And literally when you meet this person, if you do any kind of energy sensing, the life force has been like sucked out of him, right? Like he's in his late 40s, but he feels like he's in his 90s.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine what happens is for a person who is so extended, and everything, like every second of his life is like packed, right? Filled, and there's, you know, too much to do. And so the only way for his body to communicate with him, God, universe, whatever you want to call it, to be like, look, if you're going to fill every square inch of the box that is your life, and I'm trying to get you to stop that, I'm going to make your box smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
In other words, I'm going to put you in more and more dis-ease to make your capacity smaller and smaller until you learn that lesson.
Yes. I've been there.
Right? And so until you learn that lesson, that story changes. No matter how much other stuff is being done, they're only addressing, from a mental perspective, only addressing a symptom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with the person in that scenario, what are the tactics or strategies that someone would do in that scenario? It's just like, okay, how do I get the person to see what they're doing? How do we change the story? How do we change the beliefs? Do you just talk to them, or what goes on in that scenario? Like someone is listening to you and they're like, oh man, I have that issue.
Yeah. And so while ideally everything would be individualized, if I had to give general statements, I'm a huge fan of what's a micro practice that you can do in a different reality that makes the side effect of that practice actually addressing the root cause. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Right? And so what I did was, for example, I mean, we found all kinds of stuff in imbalance in his body. And he wanted, of course, because he's trying to maximize everything. He's like, give me the plan. Give me all the stuff, the entire program to do.
Yeah.
And what I did was I told him, you're only going to do one movement, right? And so because his brain was asking to fill the box of the program, he wanted to maximize everything. He's like, I want to do it all.
Yep.
I was like, no, you're just going to do a tiny bit of the box.
Yep.
If you think about it, what I'm doing is I'm getting his subconscious to practice stop filling the box, right? By saying, you're just going to do a hip flexor stretch.
Yeah.
Right? That's it. We found all this other stuff, but all you're going to do is your hip flexor stretch, and that's it. Right? Okay. And so there's a way to put in a micro practice of the concept of filling in the box. And that micro practice is addressing a mechanical cause, but technically I'm multitasking. I'm also addressing some of the mental stories. Right?
Yeah.
So and of course I planted some seeds and all that for that too.
Yeah. And that also addresses, like, I think most of the people listening to this probably just feel overburdened, overstressed in general, because we're like taking on all this information, like technology's increasing. Like I feel that it's just like, there's a new this, that, and the other thing. It's like new apps and everything's like moving at the speed of light, and taking that and just saying, nope, just do this one thing, rather than filling their bucket up even more so that they feel more stressed out. And so that's probably a perfect advice for someone listening to this, is like, pick one thing maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, and that was specific for this person, the hip flexor stretch.
Yeah.
Awesome. So now talking about living to 150 years. Let's get on that topic, because I think everybody's probably like, yeah, sure. How's that going to happen? But there are pretty awesome new technologies that are allowing us to do this, like the exosomes and stem cells and all this other stuff. But say they weren't getting injected with stem cells or whatever. What do people need to do besides what we've talked about, maybe to just increase the length of their life and enjoy it?
Yeah. So, I mean, a joke answer is like, move to South Korea, right? Because they have the highest lifespan right now, 92.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just take a flight, move. Because, in America right now, it's like 78. And so, and if you think about it, that's a big gap. That's 78 to 92 is a pretty big difference for lifespan average, right? And I'm talking, that's huge. Yeah. And so, of course, without the high-tech stuff, you can definitely add time to your lifespan and improve your health span, which essentially is how young you feel and operate at a biological age.
Yeah.
Some very common things that apply to all humans right now, especially if you live in America, is minimize industrial chemicals into your system.
Yes.
Right? And so that's, eating organic. I was, I posted this online before. It's like the only diet that applies to every human without any testing is a non-industrial chemical diet. I have yet to meet a person that can benefit from eating, Roundup, right? And so a non-industrial chemical eating plan, and that would be obviously eating organic, but more importantly, it's greatly minimizing anything that's ever been through a machine.
Process.
It's simple. If it's been through a machine, more than likely it's been contaminated.
Yes.
Right. And so that applies to all humans. That will help. Mindfulness practice, right? So we're mentally and energetically in a state of ease, in balance with dis-ease, right? Sure, there's going to be times where things put you out of ease. That's normal.
Yeah.
But again, you don't want to sustain dis-ease. You want at least this, right? Because the universe is not linear. It's cyclical.
Yep.
So some kind of mindfulness practice, that could be, I love a simple one for people who've never meditated, never tried any mindfulness practice. Let's just say the white belts. You just wiggle your finger like 100 times. You just count like 1, 2, 3, because you're focusing on the self. You're taking your mind off of the other stuff. You're bringing into the now. Yeah. Super simple.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, like super simple. You can do it like anytime. And so a little bit above that, and the most common thing is focus on breath and breathing. Right? And to some people, even that can be a little too challenging, right? So to me, that's like blue belt practice.
Yeah.
And obviously, black belt would be meditation.
Right.
So sometimes, though, when you just recommend meditation, people are like, well, I can't meditate. I can't quiet my mind. Can't. It's because it's in a way, a black belt practice. You can kind of work your way up to that. Right?
Yeah.
So that's from a mental perspective.
It's a skill, right?
What was that?
It's a skill. Just like we were talking about before, it's like a skill you learn through time.
Yeah, it's a practice.
Yeah.
Some other things, making sure you're getting great sleep, right? That's huge predictor of health.
Yeah.
And I will say that right now, sleep is being mass media brainwashed. We're programmed into thinking we need the perfect lighting, the perfect temperature, the perfect pillow, the perfect bed, the perfect everything. And only when those things are in place, then you'll get your ideal sleep.
Yeah.
I remind people, people slept well for tens of thousands, millions of years without any of that, right?
You slept better, probably.
Way better.
Yeah.
And so don't let the mass media subconsciously brainwash you into thinking you got to have the perfect condition of sleep. I've recently posted this, they looked at what was a huge component to sleeping better? Forgiveness.
Yep.
Practicing forgiveness has been shown to be massively impactful to fall asleep faster and to improve your sleep quality.
So you're talking about letting go of that negative energy,
yes,
those beams of light to release it, right?
If you think about it, forgiveness is a subtraction.
Yeah.
It's not holding on to whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
Like in duality world, the solution sometimes 50% of the time, if you average everything out, it's got to be a subtraction. It can't always be an add. We default to add. Let's add a light. Let's add a better pillow, the better whatever, because marketing can't sell you the message. It's a subtraction, right?
Yes.
We can't sell you stuff when it's a subtract. So all media basically telling us add. So we default to add. But forgiveness is a subtraction. 50% of the time, your problems will be solved by a subtraction.
So this has actually been studied when people forgive after
the studies. Yeah.
Their load has been lightened, and literally that's what we talk about. The light, they all of a sudden go into deeper, better sleep.
Yep. Yeah, this has been said. Yeah. Pretty
amazing.
Yeah.
Cool. So what else from there? So we talked about, so sleep obviously is if you're not sleeping well, you're not going to get healthy.
Yeah.
Right. Is there anything that are major factors in dealing with, longevity?
Yeah. So some other choices that you may want to choose would be, as you're getting biologically older, your body will benefit more from healing stuff than when you were younger. Just, obviously that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so people can benefit from realizing that exercise is healthy for you. However, it is not a healer. It is not accelerating healing. Because when you work out, it's taxing, it's stressing your body. And then when you give it rest, your body adapts, it becomes more resilient to that stressor, right? And
Yeah.
so it's actually a taxation on your system. It is not accelerating healing.
Gotcha.
Right? So as you get biologically older, you may want to consider using things like acupuncture, Reiki, flotation, sensory deprivation, light therapy, PEMF, a host of tech things now available for healing, getting testing done to see, maximize your nutrients from your foods, data collect, all those things accelerate and enhance healing, right? So those are things that are definitely extremely helpful to make sure that you're maximizing both health span and lifespan.
Now, this brings me to the next topic, which is in alignment with everything we've been talking about, which is what you just told people to do a lot of it deals with electricity. And basically that we are light and electrical beings. Mm-hmm. So you're essentially charging the battery,
yep,
right, by doing some of these techniques. Now, is there any one of those techniques in particular that maybe are the lowest hanging fruit that people can do right now, like just like right after this, that would help them? Because like PEMF, pulsed electromagnetic therapy, it's like you got to have this machine there and then sit in front of it or put it on you or whatever.
Yeah. I think the non-tech way to gather this electromagnetic energy into your system, which obviously I might be biased since I'm Asian. The Asians, invented Qigong, right? So Qigong is a movement breathing practice using your mind to gather electromagnetic energy, and it's free. And you can go on YouTube and type in like Qigong form, and I'm sure there's a bazillion videos, right? So that's an easy action step to do to sort of gather that. They call it Qi, life force. It's been called prana. We might use things like vitality. There's many labels for it, but from a scientific label, it's like this basically electromagnetic energy.
Yeah, and it works because I've done that in my healing journey. And you just start to feel the energy. And in acupuncture, right, is like electrical lines in the body, essentially. They call them meridians. So, great. So the other topic I wanted to talk about was autophagy, right? Is that something that you're familiar with talking about and going over with people? Because one of the topics that I think help with longevity, or not I think, is like proven, statistically proven, is fasting. Is that something that you talk about and
I do
promote?
Yeah. So when you talk about autophagy, which people don't know, it's basically as we're living, there's actually dead cells floating around, and we need to clean up those dead cells, because if you have a live cell next to a dead cell, basically if you have garbage all over your lawn and in your house, you're not going to thrive. You got to clean up the garbage.
Yeah.
So I just use very non-scientific ways to describe these things. And for sure, you want to make sure you're constantly cleaning up, and your body's constantly cleaning up this garbage. However, I will say this: I've talked to and treated over 8,000 humans in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
When you start to talk about that process, I've yet to, well, I should say, I've met maybe a handful of people out of 8,000 where they have all the other stuff so dialed in that their stories are in place and all those high level, really, really, really big things are in place, that they're at such a black belt level. Now we're getting down to this tiny detail.
Of fasting, you mean?
Of using whatever process to affect physiology at that level.
Gotcha.
So literally a handful of people out of 8,000.
That is a black belt technique that you would want to do at the end, because it takes discipline, it takes focus and that type of stuff.
Yeah, in a way. So we'll definitely talk about fasting. I actually just made a video about this recently. So I'm always thinking, what's the meta? What's the side effect that is being practiced as we're doing the main thing?
Yeah.
We're very practiced in symptoms and root cause.
Right.
And so when we're using fasting to affect our cells, you got to ask yourself, is that treating symptoms, affecting symptoms, or is it treating root cause, or maybe even perpetuating root cause?
Yes.
Right? So let's walk through this.
Yeah.
And so imagine most people, you guys work with so many people. If you had to say percentage wise, how percent of people that you guys and girls talk to have the most nurturing, loving relationship with food? I'm going to assume that percentage is pretty low.
Yeah, it's
right.
Yeah,
Maybe single digits.
It's very low.
Very low, right? And so we can say majority of the people actually don't have a nurturing, loving relationship with food, right? And so if you look at it, we know it's about the relationship that really dictates lots of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I use this analogy. Imagine you have a horrible, dysfunctional relationship with like a spouse, not talking, sometimes fight a lot, whatever. And someone says, I got the best answer for you. Only talk to your spouse between 12 and 8 p.m. Just don't talk to your spouse the other times. Oh, wait, you know what? Even better, only talk to your spouse Monday through Thursday, and 2 days a week, just basically don't talk to your spouse.
Right.
Like, that would be weird. You would be like, wait, how is this helpful, right? You really would want to be like, let's sit down with the spouse and talk about our feelings and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so fasting is purely, just keep in mind, all the research on fasting, the researchers, they're only looking at it from a blinders, physiological, very drilled down perspective. Keep in mind that 90% of that research is done on very, very, very unhealthy people that then improve their health. Very little research is actually done on healthy people.
Yeah.
And so they're not considering relationship psychology, energetics, none of that is being considered.
Yeah.
And so my concern with fasting is if we understand that most people do not have a healthy relationship with food, wouldn't we want them to interact with food more in such a way that deepens their relationship to it?
Gotcha.
That just makes sense to me, right?
So basically, if someone has a bad relationship with food, now you're forcing this other relationship that they haven't cleared anything else out of it, and now you're adding a new dynamic to it.
Yeah, it's literally disconnecting from food even more. It's like, don't even think about food between these time blocks. That just from a psychological, emotional perspective, if you disregard all the physiology, of course it makes no sense, right? You would actually want to interact with food even more. And if you talk about some people who fast, like, oh, it's great. Between the time and times that I eat, I can actually eat forever, and I'm still losing weight and being healthy and all that stuff. It's a very strong, it's a large pendulum swing. They're actually getting even better at swinging that pendulum in more and more, this would be like balance. They're actually practicing this with fasting.
Yeah.
Right. And that will show up elsewhere in their lives. Right. And so from that perspective, I typically don't recommend fasting. Right. Because I've met literally a handful of people in the 8,000 people that they have all that so dialed in, they understand that now, okay, let's get drilled down and let's cause some very specific physiological benefits of fasting. So.
Yeah, so it's basically just like training, essentially. It's like you got to get better at this skill, and then you can move into something more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I look at it like basically the way you're talking about it is like if you're learning to squat and move better, well, all of a sudden you have to do it one like rep at a time, and just automatically just like take food away, and that's it. Okay, so that makes total sense.
Yeah, and if you think about it, and people will go, oh, but people have fasted for thousands of years. Yeah, they didn't fast for autophagy, and they didn't fast for physiological reasons, it was for spiritual reasons. Yeah. Right, so it was a deeper, the fasting was about the self and relationship to the self and the spiritual connection and all that stuff. It wasn't to manipulate their physiology for a benefit. Right. So even the language of hacking and all that stuff, it's I don't know. I feel like the language dictates our reality a lot. Yeah. And the language pattern that's currently being used is very anti-self-love. Even though it's trick, it's a disguise. It's like, no, I'm actually trying to improve myself, but the language shows up as I'm trying to just manipulate my physiology and all that stuff.
So say someone's fasting for spirituality. Mm-hmm. Where does spirituality play in the mix of health and longevity? You know, you got the mind, body, spirit you see all the time. Like, where does that play into it?
Yep. So essentially, a person that is well practiced in spiritual development will essentially, the other way to say this, they're very well practiced at being in a state of ease.
Ah,
It's that simple, right? If you
like
talk to people, right? Because they're like, okay, I get it. Okay, I accept. Yep, I understand.
acceptance.
They're not like freaking out. They don't use words like I need to, I have to, I handle.
Yeah,
Those words don't come out of people with spiritual practice.
yeah. That makes total sense. Like I'm gonna say something that my wife might not like, but she'll freak out when a bug comes into the house. And I'm like, is that really to get something to get upset about? Or bugs are a part of life, right? Maybe accept it. And so that's like a scenario where I see, people get distressed over things that maybe they can just accept. It's a part of life. And the more they accept it and surrender to it, and it's like that old saying, like, grant me the serenity to change the things I can, and the courage to change the things I can't.
Yeah.
Is it kind of like what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the spiritual practice is just another label for, in a way, accepting what is.
Yeah.
And the duality of that is, oh, by the way, not only do I accept what is, the opposite of that is, oh, I'm also godlike and I can create my own reality. That's the opposite, right? Everything has duality. It's like, it is what it is. Oh, but by the way, I can completely change reality anytime I want.
Yep.
Yeah. And so that, if that is integrated into unconscious mastery, I don't see that person getting hurt, having illness, and all that stuff.
So that's essentially, in a way, alchemy, right?
Yeah.
So like they're creating the reality that they want. It's like, I'm not going to get injured. And they have that belief pattern in it without ego, maybe removing the ego.
Yeah, I think, again, so that's like the black belt way.
Yeah.
And in that oneness state of embodying that, though, most humans will find it easier to learn the lessons by stepping out of that and experiencing the ego and the duality and the chaos. So like learn some stuff.
Yeah.
And the recommendation would be, but you can anytime choose to go back into this state of peace and oneness, and you integrate some of that. You go, okay, that felt awesome, integrate. Let me go and learn some more chaos and duality and ego stuff.
Yeah.
And then go back to oneness and go, okay, that feels awesome. As
Yeah.
long as that's happening, that's pretty awesome life.
So is there a practice that someone can use now to like kind of like, is there any example or something that you can give of somebody being able to do that? Like, if someone's stressed out all day and they don't really know how to find ease, where do they start besides like, I guess that's an example, is that?
It is. So that's, the wiggling finger is the very, 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 very beginnings of the micro practice of this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, if I were to put my scientist hat on, the ideal system would be, this totally could be created, maybe I'll work on this. Imagine that someone takes a quiz, and the quiz discerns where are you in that practice, white belt or black belt.
Yeah.
And based on which level you're at, then the program or the practice will be customized based on that level. I feel like other than that, it would be very hard to like just do this, right?
Yeah.
Because it really does. Now we're talking about like anything. It'd be no different. Like if you've never seen anyone move ever, you can't just like do this workout. You got to see them move a little bit to assess where they're at.
Right.
So it'd be the same thing. Yeah. But at least having the awareness that there is this spectrum. And so you can now self-reflect, where are you in your practice? And I can tell, how you can self-assess this is just first be aware of your state, because most people who are currently holding onto stories that's then perpetuating a constant state of stress will process that by suppressing anxiety and stress.
Yeah.
Right. So they become very well practiced at not feeling.
Yeah.
And so my first step, this is like the no chemical diet applies to everyone. The be more in tune into your emotions does apply to everyone.
People numb out.
Exactly. People numb out. And so being more in tune to your every subtle changes in emotions then gives you clarity on where you're at in that spectrum. And from there, I feel like people will start to figure out like what's an appropriate thing to do.
Awesome. So a couple takeaways, I think. Qigong, right? That's a simple practice that people can do to just like automatically revitalize and build up energy. Forgiveness, we learned, right? It's probably one of the most powerful tools. Acceptance, right? So those things are healthy and healing, and then are going to just make the person feel better.
Yep.
And reap the benefits of sleep and all that stuff. So is there any other last healing hacks that we have when it comes to just increasing the lifespan, or anything that we missed out on before we end here? We're almost at the bottom of the hour.
Yeah. I think just being aware of the fact that we live right now in one of the most, we'll call it, hidden toxic times of our lives. In the past, there's been more toxic times, like when first industrial revolution, lots of chemicals and all that stuff. Like, oh my God, smells awful.
Dumping them into the river.
Right, those are known toxins.
Yeah.
I say hidden toxins because people are buying products that look so healthy, and it's filled with toxins.
Yeah.
Right, and so, and those toxins, we in Ammortal, we've tested so many people now with a high level test to see all the toxins in the body, and it's massive. And so my recommendation would be become very aware, do some due diligence to see are your products actually safe or not, and try to revamp those products to be safer, right? So you can use, Environmental Working Group, EWG.org, has a great database, Skin Deep.
They have the Clean 15, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So like the foods that are good with pesticides.
Yeah, lots of resources out there now to check your personal care products.
Yep.
I guess another one I will mention, get rid of all non-stick pans. Extremely toxic, but extremely prevalent, right? Because it's convenient, but it's one of the most toxic substances out there. And
cancer
people
causing.
may not, what was that?
Cancer causing, right?
Huge. Huge. And people may not be aware of this. Basically, 1/3 of all American water supply has been contaminated with the same chemicals that's on your nonstick pan.
Teflon stuff, the DuPont chemical.
So, and so I highly recommend, again, EW.org. So we donate money to them all the time. If you go on their website, they have like a water database. You can just plug in your zip code. You'll basically see what's in your water, and it's pretty eye-opening.
Oh, awesome. I'm going to do that.
Huge. I mean, in my area, we have 12 chemicals in our water. 8 of 12 exceed health limits.
Wow. Yeah. So filter water.
Central line filter, for sure. It's not just drinking, because you don't want to bathe and shower in the same toxic water, of course.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. So thank you very much. And they can find you on Facebook at Facebook/Body Solutions. Right? Is there anything anywhere else that they could find you? And so for the people listening, you do something pretty awesome, which is you take people for a week at a time into a specific location, and you help them figure out all these things that we're talking about and get them to a better elevated place. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we have these experiences. It's pretty awesome. So, a lot of times when you attend conferences, the way in which the information is delivered is like someone's speaking, and then you take that information, and now you got to go home and act on it, right? Such as this. What we know, if you look at the statistics, is when you attend a conference, it's a bunch of knowing stuff. 3% of the people actually implement it, right? And so recognizing that, I'm like, well, that's awful. So what we did was we created these experiences, immersive, where you come. And in every experience, you are already practicing the thing, right? For example, every meal that people eat, there's a journal, and then they write down like, what's the emotion I feel before, during, and after.
Yeah.
And so we're heightening their relationship with their food, and tons of other examples. And so we're putting many of the concepts we talked about today into the experience, so they're actually practicing on site, as we have a whole team that's data collecting stuff about them to give them even more customized action.
No way.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So Facebook, Body Solutions, any other way that they can get in contact with you or connect?
They can just go to Ammortal.com as well, with 2 M's, Ammortal. And then there's buttons there. You can reach out to me.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I appreciate it. And thank you, Steve Young, Healing Mastery Summit. And Thank you again.
Yeah.